All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. I have moved once again here, got myself into a new temporary home here after some of the internet troubles we've been having here on this show the past couple days. So hopefully things are a little bit more stable. I've also got another guest here on today. We had Sheets and Will on yesterday talking a little bit of tennis DFS. That episode is now up on YouTube if you missed it. Today we've got Max back on here. Been a little while since we've had Max on the stream. How's it going, Max?
It's going well. It has been a while, but I've been playing some MMA lately, and I had some thoughts I wanted to share on the office hours. So I thought I'd jump on for a little bit and drop in.
That's perfect. Yeah. So for anybody that is, tuning in for the first time, this is an open Q&A show. So if you have questions, feel free to fire away in YouTube chat and the Slack channel, Office Hours channel in Slack. We'll get to questions here in a moment. But for the start of the show, I'm going to just let Max go ahead and drive here and talk a little bit about some of this MMA strategy stuff.
Alrighty. So I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, hold on one second. I need to make this work.
No problem.
Let's see. And here we go. No, it needs this. I'm so sorry. Okay.
No, you're good. It's all good.
I need to open my system preferences. So sorry about that, guys.
That's all good.
Just take a second.
Patrick here said that he smashed the tennis slate on Monday. Thanks, and go Avs. I love to hear that on all accounts. A big go Avs back at you. I was stoked to see him win the cup the other night here, and happy to see people are having success with the tennis sims already too as well. I know just got that out here for Wimbledon this week, and there's been a lot of excitement in Slack already here. So really exciting stuff to see that there.
So Jordan, I'm going to have to drop off for 30 seconds to actually have this happen. So
no problem. We'll see you in a second. Okay. Thanks for coming on. Cool. All right. Bit of a false start here on the stream here today. We'll get going in just a second. I know between the last week with the stream where I disconnected and then I was sick on Friday, and then we did tennis yesterday, we've got quite a queue of questions that have been asked over the course of, I guess, the past few days. So we will get to everything here today. Excited about that. Excited to be really back in the saddle here. Healthy, fast internet connection. I'm feeling good. I know it kind of looks like I'm streaming from a prison here at the moment. We'll get that cleaned up a little bit here behind me in the next couple of days, but we got Max back.
Okay,
we've got the screen share. Yes.
There we go. Okay, so let's see here. So I think a great example for what I'm trying to talk about is actually last weekend's MMA slate, because for a couple of reasons. But what I want to talk about is basically using filters to sort of curate your lineup pool, especially when you're playing sports that are like MMA or golf or maybe tennis to a lesser extent, because there sometimes are like 30 matches on a slate or whatever. But essentially with MMA specifically, there's a lot of value in trying to get lineups that aren't just high upside or high projection or high expected value. You want lineups that other entries are not going to share, that are not going to be duplicated, right? And that is something that actually you can kind of do within what SaberSim already has for you. And so one thing, this is a few step process, but I just want to sort of go over sort of my MMA process. So the first thing you want to do is try to figure out how to adjust these ownership projections that we already have to make it so they're a little more accurate, right? Our ownership projections are really algorithmic. It's based on data, right? But there's some stuff that is kind of hard to capture in the data, right? I think a perfect example of this is Umar Nurmagomedov, I think is how you pronounce his name. Obviously, he is the cousin, I think the first cousin of one of the greatest fighters in UFC history. And because of that, our model is not, Googling just this fighter's name and deciding, oh, well, obviously he's the cousin of this amazing fighter. He's going to be higher owned. But because of that, his ownership projection we have is kind of low. What it ended up being in the flagship contest, I think, was a little over 50%, but I didn't need to know that to know to boost this fighter's ownership projection. So doing things like this, where you're getting a little more accuracy in these ownership projections, is going to come in handy later, because we're going to use some of these ownership numbers in order to actually eliminate some lineups from our pool, right? So maybe there's someone like, for example, Gamrot. Okay, he is, I don't know if this is how you pronounce his name, but he's in the championship fight, or it might have not been a championship fight, but it's a 5-round fight. And so he's really cheap. And a lot of times, if you have these championship fights and you have a cheap fighter and you also have someone you want to pay up for, the ownership can get a little greater with these guys. And so he's someone I could boost as well. So now we're just going to build lineups like normal using the default settings. And this is where I think, people want to add a bunch of value when they're in the first step, right? When they're looking at projections, they want to adjust projections, they want to adjust ownership projections, they want to curate their exposures and so on and so forth. But in this third step of the process, when we have our lineup pool, you can also add a lot of value by just working on that pool of lineups that we're giving you, right? It's because with SaberSim, we believe the pool of lineups that we're giving you, that's based on this really good simulation data, that all of these lineups are pretty viable, right? And so if we can curate these lineups even further, so we can get a pool that's even tighter and better than the pool we had originally, that's even better, right? And then we can use more lineups and we can spread the unique lineups out over the slate, so on and so forth, right? So what I'm going to do here is there's this sort of tab here where you can actually organize your lineups by Saber score. You could do it in reverse order or ascending or descending order. You can do it with projection score. You can do it with salary, and you can do it for ownership. And that really comes in handy because this is ownership and salary are really the two keys to the puzzle of whether a lineup's going to be duplicated or not. So if we organize this by ownership, right, we can actually just see, okay, these are lineups that have the greatest total ownership. And if you look at these lineups and you look at salary, if you have a lineup, I mean, this is just very simple. If you have a lineup that has high total ownership and has a high salary, it's probably going to be duplicated. So what you can actually do is just say, okay, I'm just going to eliminate it. And also maybe a high average projection as well. So like these lineups at the top, I can just easily tell these are almost certainly going to be lineups that are going to be duplicated in the flagship contest. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to straight up eliminate some of these lineups from the pool just by eyeballing them. And this really doesn't take that much time, right? But you can see, okay, 49,800. The projection score is high. The ownership were ordered by, so we know these are all high ownership. And just look through things that have high salary and high projection, right? So this is a perfect example of why we just don't eliminate all the high ownership sums. This one has a really low salary and kind of a lower projection score. This probably is not going to be duplicated despite the ownership sum. I could be wrong, but people don't usually like to leave this much money on the table. So I can sort of ignore that one and just sort of keep going. And I can just keep going like this and simply just remove some lineups from the player pool that I think are going to be duplicated. And then you can just go back by organizing by Saber score. And then if those lineups aren't in the pool anymore, great. We just don't need to worry about it anymore. And we can still get our highest Saber score lineups. Another thing you can do is think about how people are going to use players in tandem. And I think there was a real clear thing here with that when it had to do with Nurmagomedov and what's this guy's name? Who was in the main card, Gamrot, right? So we have someone here who's going to be a very popular play, and he's also really high salary, right? And if you're looking at who are the most high salary plays and who people might use. It's sort of like, okay, if you're going to use a high salary fighter, it's going to either be Umar or it's going to be Arman Sarukian. I wish these names were easier to pronounce. Anyway, he's the main card, right? So if you have a lineup with this guy, you're probably not going to just like shove in another high salary fighter. It's really, really difficult. You can see we have one lineup in our top 20 that does that. But you're going to have a lot of low salary fighters, and people don't like to do that, right? So something that you might see is, and you might expect, is that, okay, if someone uses Umar in their lineup, they're probably going to use this guy who is a very cheap fighter in the championship fight because it's a 5-round fight. He's going to have a higher floor because of that. He's really cheap. People are just by default not going to use the fighter opposite of him. And so something you can do as well is look at your lineups with these two fighters and say, okay, this has a sum ownership of 179%. So it's well off the highs of these sum ownership numbers that we're seeing. But it uses these two fighters. The salary uses every single bit of salary. We can eliminate this lineup, right? And we can go to our pool and just look at these lineups that have both these fighters, and like this one, for example, uses almost all the salary. I'm just going to eliminate it, right? And you can just go through like that. We also have something where you can just straight up trash all the lineups that fall under this filter, which I think is really useful. I probably wouldn't do this because I have enough time not to actually like look through and curate myself. But then you can just go back and you can eliminate those lineups. And now we're even closer to making sure that our pool of lineups is only lineups that we don't think are going to be duplicated. So when I'm playing MMA, this is actually what I'm spending a lot of my time on, right? Is trying to adjust these ownership projections to maybe more closely match what might actually happen. And then trying to curate this pool and just eliminate a bunch of lineups that I think are going to be duplicated. And if you do that, then you can still rely on SaberScore, which is something we've worked very hard on, and we feel like is a very strong number to rate which lineups are the best lineups. And you don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to have duplicated lineups with those lineups.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's super helpful, even just for me. I'm curious, when you were talking about like a high salary lineup, how high or how low of a salary, I guess, are you looking for to say, no, that's okay, I want to keep that in the pool? Like maybe a lineup.
I've studied this not with MMA. I've studied it with League of Legends, which is sort of a similar thing, although there's captain spot, and so it's a little different, and you don't have to worry about this as much. But what I've seen with League of Legends is once you get below about $1,000 under the max salary, that's when you sort of reach that inflection point where duplicate lineups go way down. With MMA, the salary is a little tighter, so maybe 600, 700, or 800 could be a number. But yeah, once you get under basically 1,000 under the table, that's where I'm going. All right, maybe the sum ownership is pretty high and the projection score is pretty high, but because the salary is low enough, maybe this is not going to be duplicated.
Yeah. And anybody watching along here as well, feel free to fire away if you have any questions for Max here about his MMA strategy. I was going to ask you, I had another one too. Like, how do you kind of change the way you think about this strategy as the size of the card changes, if you're like dealing with like a 10 fight card versus like a 15 fight card or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think, our ownership projections are going to reflect that in a way, right? So, but yes, if it's a 15 fight card, I'm not as worried about this as if it's a 10 fight card, you got to do something crazy.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just going to be duplicated. So I think in general, having the research sort of shows that having a unique lineup, especially for something like the flagship contest, and I'm not talking about contests that are like a single entry where there's maybe like 300 to 500 entries or something like that. You don't have to worry about it that much because your chance of duplication sort of scales with how many entries there are in a contest. But it seems like actually trying to have a unique lineup is really, really valuable. Like if you can actually get a viable lineup that's unique, it really raises the expectation of that lineup. And so I think it actually can pay off to be more aggressive than you even think you should and just really eliminate like any sort of lineup that has any chance of duplication. But I think you can also lean on the conservative side, especially if you're not that confident with your MMA process, and just make sure that, maybe like half of your lineups, if you get an outcome where half of your lineups aren't duplicated, then great, that you're adding a lot of value there.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
One other question I had, I don't see any questions coming in from anybody watching here, but I've got, I guess, a few for you here. And I know this one's kind of a tough one. This one gets asked of me quite a bit too, but for somebody, maybe, I know you have kind of an intuitive sense of Umar. I'm just going to say his first name, Umar and Gamrot, like being kind of the chalky plays based on some narratives that the ownership algorithm is not going to pick up on. Do you have any advice for maybe somebody that's like kind of new to MMA in general about where they could go to even just start building that intuition for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that one thing that is a very easy thing to do, and this goes for any sport, is go to some of the major websites like Fantasy Labs or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about being a member of these sites. I'm just saying go to sites, look at whatever their MMA article is, and see the picture of the person who's the cover boy for the article or cover girl. And that actually, I'm not joking, has actually signal in ownership model. Like if someone is on a cover of an article, that means their ownership is probably going to be higher than we expect. Right. So that's something I'm looking for. Definitely follow the people who are regularly touting MMA or whatever sport on Twitter and just see who they're on. Look for people using words like "this fight is going to be a banger" or like some sort of narrative where like, oh yeah, there's like no way, because people want fights that end in the first round, right? And it's like narratives where someone has finished every fight in the first round for the first like 4 UFC fights, or like is just notoriously really aggressive, things like that can really help. Heavyweight fighters, this doesn't always ring true, but if you have a fighter who's a heavyweight and you also have a combination of they're heavyweight and they're really aggressive, or one of the fighters is really aggressive, that's going to help a lot as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I know, this. Oh, what'd you say? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say on the reverse side, and Will has talked about this, is people usually don't like to play women fighters.
Right.
So especially if you have a lighter weight woman fighter that's not known to be aggressive, that, people think of that like Rose Namajunas fight recently where she just went 5 rounds and didn't do anything. So people do not like to play the women, but sometimes they can, I don't think our ownership model takes that into account. They don't read the name Vanessa and then suddenly we don't like put their ownership down. So I think
it indeed does not. Yeah.
Possible. I actually don't know what goes into the ownership model. Might be a question for Eric or Will or someone like that.
Yeah, I don't believe there's any like manual or even automatic like manipulation like that or anything. There are a couple of questions coming in here now. Interesting one from Jen here. And she said, do you think that the takeaway can be applied to a very small MLB slate, showdowns, or 2-game slates? Your thoughts on just like using this strategy in other sports where duplication could be a concern?
Yeah, I do it on NFL Showdown. I don't really play MLB Showdown, but I think it's valuable as well. I mean, anything where a lot of your expected value of your lineup might come from having a unique lineup. That's going to be less true for sports where there's a captain spot, because you sort of have this inherent spot that's really pricey, that's just going to have lower ownership in general.
Mhm.
But yeah, anything golf, I think this can be true, especially if it's like one of those no cut 70 person fields or one of like PGA Tour end of the year fields like that. Yeah, anything where you're playing the flagship contest and duplication is going to be an important factor. This
Yeah.
can be just a great way to just really take that into account. It really does not take that much time. I usually just take 10 or 15 minutes, and that can be eliminating like over 100 lineups out of my pool. So
Yeah, and I think contest size is a big thing here too. On baseball showdowns, like it's hard to get like those really big contests and prize pools where you're like at risk. Like the MMA flagship, I mean, there's going to be lineups that are duplicated hundreds of times, and NFL showdown, same deal. For baseball, you might be playing against 1,000 other lineups. I think the risk is a little lower there, but I think it definitely works for those other sports here. I would say, since you mentioned golf, I think one of the most useful things here that I've talked about for golf is it's another sport where narratives really can adjust ownership quite a bit. And if you have a pulse on, the golfer playing at his hometown course, or the guy that, has made 6 cuts in a row or something like that, like sometimes those things can really adjust ownership, and just getting familiar with how that's happening and making those adjustments, I think it can be really good in golf too. So, and then another question here real quick, Patrick had said, does it change your strategy if a fighter doesn't make weight, draining themselves, would they still take the fight if they're compromised? Curious just your thoughts on like weigh-ins in general and how this kind of fits in.
I've never researched it. I would be very interested to research it. I don't know if it's that intuitive. I was thinking about, I think it was Charles Oliveira, who recently missed weight and then just dominated round 1. So, and he was playing for nothing. It was like he wasn't going to get the belt. It was going to be vacated. So I don't know. It's really interesting. You would think that, the human element of that is that a fighter might be depressed, or there's something wrong with their preparation if they do that, or I don't even know, but I'm not sure. I've never seen a study on it. So I like to look at the data, and I don't know the data on it. And my anecdotal evidence was opposite of what I thought. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I have no sense of intuition there. I mean, I will say, a lot of times if news at weigh-ins does create significant line movement on the fights, we will obviously resim fights based on that and kind of capture that in both our projected ownership and the projections for the fighters. So in that way, I think some of that information is captured there. But obviously, of course, I mean, the big human element that we might miss is what's hard to quantify. And so,
right.
But cool. I don't see any other questions here coming in from folks in chat. Is there anything, Max, that you wanted to kind of add on or touch on before I let you get out of here?
Nope. I think that's it.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on. That was really interesting for me. Hopefully, everybody watching here enjoyed that as well. Take care. I'll talk to you next time.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cool.
Bye, guys.
See you, Max. All right. Cool. Let's go ahead and keep it rolling. Let me know what you guys thought of that. It's been a little while since we've had a Max drop in here on stream. Always like to get different faces and voices here on this show. We'll get my screen here now pulled up and start slowly working our way through some of the questions that have come in over the past couple days here. We've got a 15-game slate here on tap tonight. One of those special 15 gamers. I think the contests in the lobby are all beefed up a little bit here for tonight. If you have tickets by chance, satellites, free rolls, well, maybe not so much free rolls, but tickets that you've maybe accrued one way or the other, make sure to check the lobby here tonight, because there are a lot of contests running tonight that they've been running satellites for and giving away tickets for throughout the past couple weeks here. I think there's a $13 qualifier tonight on DraftKings for the live final that I have a couple tickets for. So wouldn't want to miss that. But let's go ahead here. I'm going to just, again, try to back up and pick up some of these questions here. We will start. I'm going to actually just go ahead and start with this question from Toasted Taters here. And we'll just handle these as best we can in chronological order. So this question said for research builds for baseball specifically, if he runs 1500, 0010, and he goes to uncheck a player that's showing up in one lineup, then the build will run 1,500 more lineups, giving you 3,000 lineups and a very different optimal percentage. Seeing the player pool of pitchers go from 12 pitchers at 1,500 to 5 or 6 at 3,000. Is there anything we can take away from this, or are you just going to unnecessary, uncharted territory? Yeah, I'm surprised actually that that's still working. That is kind of a bit of a loophole, to be honest, that you're not really supposed to be able to do at all. I wouldn't trust it. And actually the main reason why is because when you uncheck a player, the builder is no longer building in what I would call a pure way. It's basically, it's making sure that every lineup does not have that player in it, which isn't really kind of the main factor here. It's just that the builder itself is not just you're no longer getting necessarily an unadjusted optimal from every single sim. And it is not as if like that player's optimal rate is spread out evenly on all of the other players in the pool. And the effect is minimal. It's probably having a major impact on those optimal rates for the extra lineups in your pool. Which is why you're getting such different pitching exposures when you're on the other side. So I wouldn't do this. I think in theory, if you could build 3,000 kind of pure lineups in a research build to begin with, that would be great, but you can't. And this kind of loophole / workaround is probably not taking you in a helpful direction here. So I'd avoid doing that. And in fact, that's a loop that might get closed here sooner rather than later. It looks like there was some discussion in Slack about that as well here. But let's go ahead and keep it moving along here. It looks like Tim had a couple questions about my contest selection video, our DFS profit plan, as we are calling it, which is up on YouTube as well. If you missed that, it's a nice 15-minute. Actually, let me go ahead and see if I can show you guys that real quick here. Show you where that is. We've been working on some of these shorter videos to get out. I know we have a bunch of like hour-long videos on our YouTube channel, but we wanted to get a little bit of shorter videos out, summarizing key concepts from some of those longer videos for people that don't have, an hour and a half to watch the full stream with me and Eric, for example. So let me see. Yeah, and actually, I should pin this up to the top of our YouTube channel, but let me show you guys where these couple videos are real quick. So for people that don't know or haven't seen them where they are, you guys know where to find them. So cool. So on our YouTube channel here, down at the bottom, Mastering SaberSim's Tool and Optimizer, 2 new videos. So Start Winning War with our DFS profit plan, 17-minute video, kind of summarizes a lot of the concepts that I talked about with Eric as a result of our contest selection research. Should be kind of a quicker way of getting familiar with this new framework here. And then an 8-minute video talking about the upside correlation, which is a new change to the way our correlation works, big improvement to the correlation slider that I talked about with Matt here over the past couple weeks a bit here on one of the streams. So definitely check those out if you haven't seen them yet. Anyway, let's go ahead and answer the question here from Tim here. And I think this is directly related to what I covered in that video. He said, with the new contest selection method, I built first for the 50-cent mini max. Do I fill it with 150 or only 100? Then when going to the 220 maxes, do I use the same top 20 lineups from my 150 build? Top 40, or do I create completely new builds for my 20 maxes? Same question for the 3 maxes and single entries, completely new builds, or take them from this 150 build. And then second, what is the difference between rank, unique? Okay, so a bunch of questions here. So first of all, so let's start first with the mini max question here. So the mini max is a 150 max contest. So we would call it one of those diversifier contests, right? A contest that you can get a lot of unique entries into pretty cheaply, smooths out your variance, gives you a lot of shots on goal, the high upside outcome. So what your goal is once you've decided how much money you're going to spend on that slate, you want to take up 50 to 75% of that with diversifier contests. And you want to do it by lowest entry fee to highest entry fee. So I would actually say, probably, if you watch the video back as well, you probably almost always want to start with filling that quarter jukebox, the 25-cent 20 max. That's generally the cheapest and best diversifier to start for most people. If you have a very small bankroll, you might want to start with a dime time or maybe a few dime times. But I think for most people, that quarter jukebox for $5 is the best place to start. And then how many entries you put into the mini max depends a lot on how much money you can afford to spend in diversifiers for that slate. If you're playing $100 total, right? Well, you have $50 to $75 available for your diversifiers, right? Well, $5 is already taken up in your quarter jukebox. So I would probably play 70 additional dollars worth. So what is that? 130 lineups into the mini max, right? And that would kind of fill that. The one exception here, and I know this can be kind of confusing. I think if you're following the general, if you're getting 50 to 75% of your daily wager into diversifiers, you're in a good spot. You're doing the right thing. One thing that we did find in our research, though, is that if you can afford to max a contest at higher stakes and you cannot afford to max the contest at lower stakes, you should max the contest at higher stakes. So one example here would be that, you can play the $1 20 max for $20. It takes $75 to max the 150 max. So you should probably play the $1 20 max before you play the mini max, the 50 cent 150 max, right? So I know our goal here is trying to be clear and specific to what we found in our data, because there are kind of clear recommendations here, but I know it does create a little bit of confusion here in terms of what you actually do when you get it. It's a bit like riding a bike. When you get it, I think it all kind of clicks into place. But hopefully that was helpful. Again, the main goal here is establish how much you are spending on a slate. That should be 2.5% to 5% of your total bankroll. Then 50 to 75% of that should go into diversifier contests, which are 20 and 150 maxes, and you fill those lowest to highest entry fee. Let's answer the next questions here. So there's kind of 3 total. So in terms of what lineups go into these contests, you always want to use a unique lineup into every single entry. So really for both of these questions, I can kind of answer this at once here. Basically, you would figure out once you've entered everything, all of your elevators, all of your diversifiers, your 20 maxes, 150 maxes, single entries, everything all together, you would build a unique entry, a unique lineup for every entry. And the easiest way to do that is to do it in all in one build. So I like to pick kind of a midpoint set of sliders that is kind of in between everything. My single entries, my 150 max, right? The 20 max 10 to 50K sliders, I think, are always a very good in between there. And then say at the end of it, I'm at 223 total lineups. So I would say 223 lineups. I would often recommend adjusting your pool size up to 1,500, and then you'd build these, right? And I actually have entries registered here for tonight's slate. So we can actually see, I don't remember exactly what my number is here, but we'll let these build here real quickly. And then I'll answer this last question about the fill methods. And while this is building, I'll quickly touch on Jason's question here because it applies to this here. When you say you can only use up to 5% of your bankroll on a given slate, is that your overall spend across all sports or for each sport? That is your overall spend for any correlated slates. So if you're playing 2 different sports, those are completely uncorrelated. If you played tennis this morning and you're playing baseball tonight, those have no impact on one another, right? But if you're going to choose to spread out and play like the baseball main slate, the night slate, maybe some showdowns, some turbo slates, those are all correlated. Your results in one affect the other. So in that case, you would just want to do 5% total for all of that, right? Because you don't want to be overexposed in that particular situation. But if you're talking about separate sports completely, it's okay to play 5% in both tennis and baseball, for example. Of course, the 5% is like the maximum. You don't want to exceed 5%, and it's a true max. You don't have to play 5%. I think if you have a smaller edge or a smaller perceived edge in one sport versus another or something like that, perfectly fine to play a little bit less. I love golf DFS. I think it's a hard sport to beat. I play less in golf DFS every single week than I play in baseball pretty much every single night. So let's go ahead here. We'll make 2 changes to free up our lineups from the DraftKings gods here. And then I'll answer this last question about the fill methods here in just a second. A little bit locked up here. Let's see. Okay. All right. We're good. Okay. And then we'll do fill here. Give this a second just to load. And then download. And I'm not logged in here. I'm on actually a different computer now today. So let me go ahead and log in first so that I can get an entries file. Thank you for the patience here with me today. Okay. Now we downloaded that. Get this back up and upload the entries file that we just downloaded. Okay, so how many entries do I have total? It'll say it down here, which is nifty. So I have 199. So I actually can go back here real quickly and change this so that I have 199 unique lineups. And then basically, if you are filling uniquely, you want to use one of the two unique fill options. So there's unique random and unique rank. There's not really a wrong way to do it, to be completely honest. It kind of depends on what you want. I prefer unique random most of the time. What that's going to do is that's going to put a unique lineup here from a unique and random lineup from my pool into every single entry, right? So every entry is going to get filled with a random lineup. And that's because, I'm making a lot of adjustments here to exposures and changing things here in step 3. And I don't really want to be that opinionated here about what lineup goes into what contest. But if you want, your top lineups to go into your highest dollar contest, for example, you may prefer instead to use unique rank. So unique rank, for example, instead would put your best overall lineup in the chin music in this case. Then it would put lineups 2 through 4, 2, 3, and 4 in the hot corner. Then lineup 5 in the pickoff. Then lineups 6 through 26 in the solo shot, right? And you could potentially fill every lineup. You could still have a unique lineup into every single entry, but fill it in order of saber score. So kind of depends on what you're looking for here, but either unique random or unique rank will do the trick. So, and having a unique lineup in every entry is kind of a key component of this framework. So I definitely focus on that. So cool. I'm going to keep us going here. Let's see. Let's get this question here from Jeff. He said, staying on the profit plan theme, is there a number of lineups that are needed in order to realize the diversification shown in your research? For example, 20 to 40 lineups enough? Yeah. So, what we have found is that you do need, basically for a contest to really fill the role of a diversifier, you need to be able to get at least 20 lineups into that contest. So it does get interesting when we start talking about, some of the last lineups in your portfolio or the last diversifiers in your portfolio as you are filling them out. You generally want to be able to make sure that you can at least get 20 lineups into them. If you're playing 6 lineups into the flagship contest as your final piece of your diversifiers, it's likely that those lineups are not actually diversifying you in that they are actually increasing your variance. They are not decreasing your variance. So around, I would say, you can kind of start to think about something being a true diversifier as it's defined as a contest that lowers your variance of that portfolio once you have 20 lineups in play in it. In terms of the minimum number of lineups that you need to see in your portfolio to for this process to work in general, I think by around somewhere between 20, I would say 20 to 40 lineups is probably where that makes sense. If you were playing with a very small bankroll, you could theoretically play just the quarter jukebox and maybe the $1 single entry, the $2 single entry, and the $1 3 max, and play 25 unique lineups. And I would say that probably still fits our recommendations for essentially $10 a night. So that should work. Good question. Okay. And then a question from Kino here. And I'm realizing as I'm doing these here today that there are questions further back that I forgot about that I think got asked on some of the tennis streams and stuff like that yesterday. So we'll jump backwards in time here in just a moment. This question says this probably has been asked before, but what set of input data does SaberSim use for running the MLB sims? I'm assuming the left and right split of the batters and the starting pitchers is included. But what about the pen? I would actually, I would probably recommend, if you are interested in this, on our YouTube channel, I would watch this video when you have time, or even just listen to it. I know it's an hour and a half long, but this was me 2 months ago. I talked to Matt and Will, who Matt, obviously built the original MLB Sims. Will has had a huge part in updating the model the last 2 years. It is a pretty impressively robust simulator, and they will just do it far more justice than I can here on this stream. So I would go check that video out. Goes into detail what goes into the sims, and we typically do this kind of video every time like a new major sport comes out. So up here, we did a similar one for MMA. When football starts up in the fall here, we'll have the models guys come on a little bit as well and talk about how the NFL sims work, and what goes into the actual models. But I would watch that video because it's just going to do way more justice than I can do here. So cool. Lionheart here has a comment here, and said, not an MMA question, but I don't understand why the tennis sims would give 0% of the top women's player who is a lock for 75 plus. Let's go and look at this here. These are really hard questions to answer, especially with a new model. It's almost impossible to say, like, explain this result from the sims when this kind of question comes in. What I suspect, I assume you're talking about Swiatek. I don't know how to pronounce her name. One thing to note here is, like, it's easy to say, oh, this player is a lock for this certain score, but that's I don't know. That's I guess that's never really the case, right? There's obviously like still some downside here. Obviously still a pretty safe play, but the most expensive play on the slate on a 29-30 match slate. The one thing to note here, I would say, is that there's almost always more diversity in your pool than you might expect. I think at times, sometimes people run the build, they build 500 lineups, maybe they're looking at their top 20 or whatever, and they say, why didn't I get any of this really good player? And the reality is that there's probably quite a bit of exposure to that player in your broader pool. You just don't have any in this relatively small subset of 20 lineups that you're looking at here. So, do you want some Swiatek? So and maybe you're talking about a different player, but maybe you want more than this, right? Maybe you want 40%, right? It's probably there. And of course it is, right? Do you want to lock this player in, right? It's there, right? So there are opportunities to make these adjustments based on what you think is the optimal strategy for the slate. And that's kind of a lot of what I talk about here on this show is like, ways to add value like that. And if you've got a sense, I think, one of the beauties of SaberSim here, or one of the best parts about this, is that this pool of 500 lineups is viable for the contest that you're playing already, right? And you're just selecting 20 out of that. So if you feel like this is just the easiest free square you've ever seen on a tennis slate, lock her in and let the builder tell you what the best 20 ways to do that are, right? So, but let's go ahead here. I'm going to first go through YouTube chat, make sure I didn't miss any questions, and then we'll back up and see if there's any other questions from the past couple days. But CJ said, if I'm doing multi-entry, how many players should I lock as a core? I would say none, personally. On multi-entry, I prefer to play a highly diversified style. I like to get a lot of exposure to a lot of different players, a lot of different stacks. I like to spread out my risk. I like at the end of the night when my portfolio of lineups on the DraftKings looks spread out, right? Like I have lineups in almost every single finishing percentile. So I would say none. I don't think you need to lock any. Now, that being said, if you want to play a more concentrated style, if you want to say, I'm going to lock one pitcher and one stack, and I'm going to build 40 lineups, and if I get the pitcher right and I get the stack right, I have 40%, I have 40 other chances to get everything else right. That's great. That's fine. What that means, though, is that you are going to brick a lot of slates. You're also going to win slates heavily when you're right, but you're going to brick a lot of slates. So I just don't want to do that. That's basically like the choice that I've made is I don't want that level of downside potential on a given slate. So cool. Okay, let me back up here a little bit and just see if there were any questions that I missed over the past couple days. Again, I know for a few of these here, I have answered in Slack here already. I would say, there were a couple people that had mentioned that they were unsure of how to, or unsure of where like the FanDuel version of the DFS profit plan video was. I wanted to keep that video kind of short. I wanted to focus more like on concepts and just get like a quick, we're calling them quick hitters is what we're calling them internally here. And I wanted it to be 15 minutes or so of just kind of how to use the profit plan to enter contests. If you are playing FanDuel, I would try to apply the system on the lobby in FanDuel. It should work in a similar way. And if you run into issues or specific questions, feel free to fire away at me. But the goal there really is that this is a framework that can be used and applied not just for the DraftKings MLB lobby as it is in June of 2022, but you've actually got something useful that could be used, for other sports, for other sites, for other contest types, that kind of thing. So I saw that question coming in a fair bit, but cool. What other questions do we have here today? It's been a while, it feels like, since we've had like a clean stream here. Pretty excited about it, not going to lie. What else do we have? Any other questions for me here? Do we have any weather concerns on tonight's slate? I'm curious. It would be a dream if we did not here. Let's I'm sure we do though. 15 games. There's got to be weather somewhere. How about Chad Cool shutting out the chalkiest Dodgers ever last night in Coors Field? That was something. I was under on Dodgers. I had no Cool, but I didn't get to the right other spots. So Jason said, I know you addressed it many times, but the easiest way to reduce your exposure to a single MLB game, for example, the Rockies game tonight, if you want to fade it a bit. Yeah, that's an interesting situation. I would say in this particular situation where we've got this game where, how much higher are the Dodgers projected than every other team on the slate? They are a full run above the next best projected team. So they're way above, right? One thing that I think you can do to like help give the builder, if you know that you're going to take a certain strategy before you build, right? One thing that you can kind of do to help it along is adjust the team totals here ahead of time, right? So if you come in here and maybe just adjust them down by like a run and maybe adjust the Rockies down by a half of a run, this is going to adjust the projections of these players ahead of the build, and it should give you a better result. It should make them more easy to dial in your exposures in the post-build process when you get there, right? And what's nice about this is you get a correlated change. Oh, that didn't do anything. I might need to check on that. That looks a bit like a bug to me, unfortunately. I will check on that as soon as we hop off of this. That looks like that's just not working correctly. In general, that would be the best way to do it. I would say if you, for one reason or another, like that, cannot do that, you should be able to just adjust it here with your exposures in the post-build process. So we'll build another set of 20 lineups here, 500 lineups, but another set of 20, and see what we get. But that was annoying. That should have worked. So always a bit awkward when I uncover something like that live on stream here. And I'm realizing as well here today that I think my streaming software is just a little mischievous with the unstable connection warnings that I get. I know it has been pretty bad recently, but I am getting one of those messages now, and I find it hard to believe based on the current connection that I have that I actually have an unstable connection. But if you guys are having any issues hearing me or seeing me, let me know. I sure hope not. But give this a second to load here. And I imagine we'll probably have a lot of Dodgers. You know, the other thing here too that's interesting is like 15 game slate. I'm curious to see how the ownership actually breaks out for the Dodgers. And I haven't looked at the slate very much at all. I'm curious who's on the mound here for the Rockies as well. But when they let down like they did the other night, I think there's some argument that people might go the other direction. And actually no Dodgers showing up here at all by default on our end. So interesting. So, I mean, we're not getting any, and that's probably an ownership thing, right? But it seems like it seems like SaberSim doesn't really want to play the Dodgers right now, period. So, you know, if we were, let's just take an example. If you're just so I can actually answer this question here, if you want to get less of a team that you're getting a lot of, maybe you're looking and saying, 45% Pittsburgh. I don't want that much Pittsburgh, period. You can come in here and say, 20% max Pittsburgh stacks. And what we'll do, we'll sort through the pool of 500 and pull out the best 20 where no more than 20% are Pittsburgh stacks. So one thing to be aware of tonight here, and I think it's a good opportunity to mention this, 15 game slate. The player pool is enormous. It's massive. Give yourself a little extra time tonight. Builds might take a little bit longer. Little things like that can take a little bit longer. We work really hard to make the app as fast as possible. But a 15 game baseball slate is one of the more taxing slates on the system. So give yourself a little extra time to build your lineups here tonight. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're building right at lock and you're expecting you need a build to finish in 25 seconds to make lock. Give yourself a little extra time tonight. I think everybody will be happy if you do. But any other questions here for us today before we start to wrap up here? A couple small, housekeeping items here. Of course, we'll be back again here tomorrow on another stream. We'll be on time tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. Had to push things back a little bit today just to get into the new office. And then stay tuned. I'll be putting out a video before the end of the week called How to Beat Tennis DFS. Of course, if you missed it yesterday, the conversation with me, mostly Sheets and Will about Tennis DFS Strategy is up here on our YouTube channel here. I had some serious internet connection issues at the time during this video. You can see, look at this thumbnail, how grumpy I look, if you guys can see it. That's because my internet was going in and out. So mostly ended up being a good conversation between Sheets and Will, but very informative. Great for Wimbledon here to learn a little bit about our tennis sims and how to play tennis DFS. I'll be putting out kind of a shorter video summarizing a lot of those concepts here before the end of the week. But Jen said, would you recommend adjusting the 5-stack percent or total team percent? It's up to you, whatever you prefer. If you prefer to, make adjustments, I think these are useful and cool to look at. Like if you're asking me personally, I think these are cool to look at. There aren't a lot of times in my lineups where I'm like, I want to specifically lower my 5-stack exposure to one team. I would prefer to adjust it just to the teams in general. Like I'm not sitting here thinking I want max 40% 5 stacks of Texas. I want max 40% Texas, period. Right. But that's just me. They are there. They're there for a reason. So, use them if you want to, right? So, Chris says, when I built my build a few minutes ago, right before you said that, my lineup went 4-4 using Dodgers. Yeah. So I have a theory, that the team total adjustment I did before this build actually worked and that it's just not showing up on the front end. So it's a bug either way, but I have a theory that it actually worked. But but I am not positive about that, but we'll look into that as soon as I hop off anyway. So Matt says, any thoughts on capping individual batters to spread things out? Say Trey Turner is 35%, capping all batters at 40%. I do think that it is a generally decent rule of thumb, coming from somebody that generally hates rules of thumbs, to think about this number, the highest projected owned hitter, being a decent number for how high you want your maximum owned hitter to be. So in this case, that would be what, 27%. So if you come in here and put 27 for 20 lineups, it's essentially 25, right? And you can see a lot of times the builder will actually, I think, get you pretty close to that anyway. But I do think that can be a pretty good tool, or a pretty good heuristic to get there. So, and then in this case, we would do it one more time for Joey Votto. Broadly speaking, I mean, I'm definitely interested in capping exposures and managing risk. I think it's one of the best ways to add a little value to the SaberSim process. So Guy Will Gamble said, what office are they holding you at? Blink twice if you're in danger. I'm at the satellite office, man. I moved in here like 25 minutes before the stream started. So until there's a better internet situation at the house, this will be the home of the shows for a while. So I'll hopefully try to make it a little friendlier looking here. The white walls are a little intimidating, I know, at the moment. So we'll make it look nice. We'll clean it up. But I'm happy to be here. The internet is so much better, so I can finally actually do the stream again. So pretty happy about that. All right. Cool. Well, we will go ahead and leave it there for today. If by chance you tuned in here and you are new to SaberSim or new to this community, we have a totally free 7-day trial on our site, SaberSim.com. You can check it out. No strings attached. You get the opportunity to check out our new tennis sims, to play tonight's big 15-game baseball slate. You get it for 7 days. So you get, the MMA card this weekend. I think is a pay-per-view fight again coming up this week, or maybe it's next week. I might be wrong. You get NASCAR. You get Formula One if there's a race this week. I'm a little behind on some of this stuff here, but you get access to all of our different sports here, totally free, 7 days. Give us a try, and I will be right back again for a stream tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern for another office hours. So in the meantime, enjoy the slate tonight. Good luck, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.